Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have three members from the House of Delegates. Chris Collins, good to see you, sir.
Good seeing you, sir. Thank you.
Wendy Gooditis, this is your second full session, correct?
It is.
And Dave LaRock, how are you doing, sir?
Real good, Woody. Thanks for having us here with you.
Any issues around I-81 this year?
That is a bit of an issue here, although I think it is being overshadowed by a couple others regionally. It's very, very significant to all three of us, and right on down the Shenandoah Valley. I had hoped that we would, the delegation that represents that area would be huddling up and kind of coalescing around a preferred funding alternative. I'm getting a little bit concerned that that seems to be slow in the process of happening, partly because of so many other very important issues. And obviously a very significant problem. I think one of the statistics that sticks in my mind is that 45 times a year, at least one lane, one direction of 81 is closed off for more than 4 hours. That's just an enormous loss.
45 times a year?
45 times a year,
wow.
4 hours. So that's just, I mean, if you, a hiccup and you'll see a backup on 81, but to actually shut it down for 4 hours, and then vehicles flood into the local towns and then congest the roads that are nearby. So we have some propositions on the table that propose a toll on through truck traffic and through vehicle traffic. It would leave the commuter traffic untolled and allow a annual use fee, sort of like a park pass. I think of it for about $30 a year, which is about what you can easily pay if you travel to the east on I-81, I-66 inside the Beltway. You can pay that one way. That to me makes $30 a year sound pretty good. Whether we'll get there or not this year, I'm not sure, but I hope we do take some action on it.
So I take it that the trucking industry would bear the brunt of the tolls.
Well, probably another good data point is that projections are that 60% of the revenue that they would expect to come from the tolling through traffic would come from out-of-state trucks. Okay. But they would bear the brunt, and if you stand on an overpass and look north or south, I would liken it to a railroad train. The trucks are so close as you look off into the distance. It's kind of the outcome or the product of success. There's a lot of industries that have congregated around that corridor, and they want a good functional highway, and that's what we'd like to give them.
Would there be a way to monitor the truck traffic to avoid them just pulling off to avoid the tolls?
Yeah, I haven't heard the real fine points, but I believe there would be some camera monitoring. They would place gantries, I think, where it would not be convenient to just bypass around that particular gantry. One gantry at each north and south end of the road, and then 4 in between, total of 6. And they would be all electronic so as to not slow the traffic as they passed under a gantry. So if you can come up with a better system of tolling that is has the least impact on commuters that want to use the road locally, but to actually get the revenue from the people who use it the most, I think this is a pretty fair proposition. But
any adverse reaction from some of your colleagues up in Northern Virginia about that $30 pass?
You know, it's interesting. So I'm kind of bookended by the eastern part of the county of Loudoun. Western Loudoun is the eastern part of the district I serve. And if the word toll, and people just kind of start pulling their hair out because of I-66 inside the Beltway, the Greenway Dulles Toll Road. That's a $40 one-way trip to work. When they hear tolls in the west, they think, don't pull another fast one out. So interestingly, the feedback I'm getting, most of it negative, comes from the eastern part of the district, which is would be least affected by it. But they just see the word toll and they think that they're about to be had.
So where is your legislation now, or where is the legislation? It's in the Transportation Committee, I assume.
Yeah, I think so. Delegate Landis and Delegate Austin are carrying a piece on the House side, and Senator Obenchain, and I'm not sure if he has a co-patron on his side. But as far as I know, again, we keep talking about huddling up and trying to figure out what the consensus is. Because obviously we have to win over a lot of people who are less affected by Route 81, and I think it's on the table now.
Well, that's good. And no less complicated an issue, however, is the necessity to act quickly in terms of whether Virginia will conform to the federal tax code given the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that Congress passed last year. Tell us what's going on with that, Delegate Collins.
Well, sure. So basically, every year we have to conform Virginia state tax code to match the federal tax code. And with the significant tax reform the federal government passed last year, which was after we completed our session, we have to come back this year and try to conform our tax code to that of the federal government. The individual deductions is probably the number one issue that are going to affect the majority of Virginians. And so there's a variety of different plans and proposals in place and say what that individual tax break should be. And there's various arguments to say, well, this is going to give the lower middle class or the middle class or the upper class more of a tax break or less of a tax break, and more of a refund or less of a refund. The other thing that muddies up the water with the tax reform is, of course, we have competing interests within the House of Delegates and in the Senate and the governor's office as to what windfall we're going to get from the tax reforms and how those should be spent. And so even though you may not say it's a quote-unquote tax increase, there's going to be additional taxes being paid under certain plans, tax refunds under other plans, and we're still working through all of that. And there's a variety of different proposals that are being floated around, and some of them I think are going to be, I think we'll find the level playing field for everyone to agree on at some point in time.
And Delegate Gooditis, one of the big issues relates to the earned income tax credit. And of course, the governor has made a proposal that would make those fully refundable. Virginia right now is not a state that fully refunds that earned income tax credit.
Right. The federal tax credits this year, one of the groups they affect is sort of negatively are people who earn, a lot of people who earn whose household income is under $50,000 a year. And the earned income tax credit would benefit those people. They would get some more money back than they would under the current federal plan.
What about some of the priorities that the governor outlined in his address to the Commonwealth the week before last, especially in terms of education, because I know you have a background as a teacher.
Well, I do, and the governor has always been very involved in wanting to improve education. I think there are a lot of things. I remember when he was running the new collar jobs, the building a pipeline for the cybersecurity knowledge that we need. We have so many jobs open in the field of cybersecurity. And I met him at a school recently, and it was an elementary school where they start programming in kindergarten. So it's starting this technology pipeline is one of the things that he's very interested in doing.
You also have a background in terms of working with domestic violence, families who are exposed to that. I think you have a bill dealing with the clergy's requirement, not current requirement, but your bill would require them to report domestic abuse.
Right. It's actually reporting any knowledge of any child, any abuse of children. And there are many mandatory reporting categories already out there, teachers and hospital personnel and doctors, and this just adds to that list of people who would have a responsibility to report if they have any knowledge of a child being abused or neglected. We actually have a lot of support across a lot of denominations.
And Delegate LaRock, you have some legislation dealing with child safety savings accounts.
Yep.
What's that about?
Okay, yeah, child safety savings account is meant to be a way to address bullying in the classroom. Big problem. The outcome of bullying is just horrible, not only for the kids in the classroom, but especially for the affected child. Very often leads them to extremes where self-harm or even harming others. Parkland school shooting was a great example of a child who, from the words of his own classmates, had been bullied. So how do we deal with situations like that? Well, there's a variety of things, and many of them are actually encompassed in the caucus endorsed school safety initiative. This in particular, I think, is very closely aligned with those, but it proposes to give a child and his parents who find themselves in a situation where bullying is a problem that just won't go away, to give them the ability to exercise their choice to be mobilized and go to a different school. Incident in Frederick County, classic example of a young girl who's in a high school, was assaulted. I think it's been pretty much determined that actually took place. She finds herself in a high school with the victim, with the perpetrator. Very uncomfortable situation. Took a long time to resolve it, but she's had to leave the school. So this child safety savings account would allow some of the money that this state apportions to that individual child's education to be put in the hands of the parent, so that child can move perhaps to another school or to a private school and apply those monies to the expenses that are related to that.
Great. Public safety in general, again, you're pursuing handheld devices that are used way too much in our personal vehicles. How do things stand in that regard?
So last night at about 9 o'clock, we passed a hands-free legislation out of the subcommittee. So as it stands right now, you cannot hold your phone in your hand, on your shoulder, or anything like that. So you cannot be holding your phone. You can still utilize your phone to make phone calls and things of that nature and use GPS. We realized, because of course we did it late last night, we realized we left a couple loopholes that we're probably going to have to work on closing. But the appetite, I think, is there to be a hands-free state. And there's 35 states already. Virginia, I think, it's been a 14% increase in fatalities across Virginia when it comes to distracted driving. And I can sit here and tell I've talked to several victims' families, and some were the ones texting, others were victims of other people's texting. And it is I think, just like DUI laws. We started DUI laws 40 years ago, actually 45 years ago. And we're still working on it. It's still a work in progress. And I think distracted driving is still going to be the same thing until we have completely autonomous self-driving cars. It's going to be an issue.
So what's been the nature of the opposition to this legislation?
There's been a couple different oppositions. One, people just don't like being told what to do in their cars. They feel like they're better drivers. They can eat a Big Mac, talk on their phone, and drive with their knee. The additional opposition is that they believe that this gives law enforcement more authority to pull people over for frivolous things in order to harass and intimidate. And then another is that just the fact that it's such a difficult law to prosecute, because there are so many things on your phone nowadays that we create so many exceptions that you need to use it for GPS. You can make a phone call on it, you can text on it, you can FaceTime on it, and to make a laundry list. I actually made a joke last night that I was just going to pass a law that says you're not driving at the 9 and 3, it's reckless driving, and just end this. Obviously, that's not a practical solution to the whole thing. But it's a sticky wicket to get through. 35 states have done it. No one has gotten it 100% right. And I think just like with the DUI statutes, it took us 20 years before we really had the DUI statutes kind of nailed down where they were being prosecuted on a regular basis in the courts.
Is there any technology that can retrieve information from a cell phone to demonstrate that at a certain time texting was occurring or calls were being made?
Absolutely. So once there is proprietary programming law enforcement uses, they can take your phone, they can plug it into the computer, and they can download everything on your phone, and they know exactly when the last time you logged into your phone. So we've been able to utilize that, but you need a search warrant to do that. This phone is subject to a search warrant. So you have to get a search warrant to be able to download all the data. And then I know of cases where they were able to determine in a car accident that there was a text sent 30 seconds before impact. So we know that there was some distraction going on. So it is a prolific problem. I count when I come down I-95 from Winchester, I count the number of people passing me or I'm passing that have their phone, they have their phone in front of them. And it's like I said, I think people have become immune to it in their own car. They're upset when other people forget to pull through the green light because they're talking on their phone, but when they do it, obviously, so there is some of that. And I think, I think fighting through some of those prejudices is going to be difficult, but I think we're going to get there.
Delegate Gooditis, how significant a problem is domestic violence in terms of children actually observing those kinds of things within their families?
Apparently it is the biggest predictor of someone growing up to be a criminal, a violent criminal, that they were raised in a household where there was domestic violence. And so I have a bill now, and this came to me through our Commonwealth attorneys, that would make domestic violence in front of children its own criminal offense with its own separate penalty.
And is that in the Courts of Justice Committee?
It will be, yes.
Okay. Now, but back to your days as a school teacher, our kids are confronted with much more in terms of technology, in terms of domestic violence, in terms of mental health issues. Our schools have become more social service agencies as opposed to actually teaching their students. They have very little support. Their pay is at a very low level compared to other jurisdictions. What is the General Assembly doing, in your opinion, about those issues?
Well, I know our governor would like to see another larger pay raise for teachers. Our teachers deserve it. They need it. We gave them 2% last year. It was barely a start. We have a teacher shortage in this state, and really, if you're intelligent and active and energetic and you want to make a good living, you might choose something other than teaching, as wonderful a career as teaching is. So I hope that we can find more money to pay the people who look after our children for 8 hours a day. They're worth it.
What about foster care? I understand that there was a report recently issued which pointed out a number of serious deficiencies in foster care throughout the Commonwealth.
I don't know a lot about foster care. I know that our wonderful delegate, Jennifer Carroll Foy, has a lot of experience. She was a foster mother herself, and I know that there is legislation in the General Assembly right now that would support and encourage foster care parents, but it's not something I know a lot about.
And Delegate LaRock, as I understand it, there was a fairly large expense item discovered recently regarding our Medicaid program in terms of managed care. In other words, they underestimated the impact of what they thought was going to be a positive revenue versus one that cost the state apparently almost $500 million. And apparently that's something that's going to reduce the amount of monies available to the General Assembly this year to spend on other items.
Yeah, well, one tries to avoid jumping to conclusions, but it is hard to imagine that they say that everything is deliberate in politics. So in the run-up to a decision to expand Medicaid, we were working with information that grossly underestimated the cost of the existing Medicaid program. Now, if you were to speculate on the effect of that, it would be to perhaps make the argument to expand an already out of control budget item more attractive, which I think it did. So then to have the shoe drop after the decision has been made, I've made the comment that, you know, if in the private sector, if you underestimated an expense at that scale, guiding a decision of whether or not to expand that, I think there'd be heads rolling. Now, I'm not calling for anybody's resignation, but we want to be able to trust the people that are providing us with the information that guides our decision making, and that was a gross underestimation that probably guided the decision that will now cost not only the existing Medicaid, but the expanded version. It's going to continue to consume vast amounts of our budget. The flip side of that is money that doesn't fix our roads, doesn't hire people in public safety, doesn't go to teacher raises and the whole laundry list of other things that I would consider to be very legitimate expenses. We have a budget amendment in this year, a little bit, I think it's bouncing or connected to some of our other conversation. We found that we've legislated a ratio that for every 1,500 residents of a county, there should be one sheriff. So several counties are way understaffed, not enough sheriffs, so I put in a budget amendment to remedy that, and hopefully that will pass, and that will have the potential of these sheriffs becoming available to the counties, and they could also be used as school resource officers to keep kids safe.
On a positive budgetary note, I understand that there is the potential for significant additional revenue as a result of a recent Supreme Court decision regarding the ability to impose sales taxes on internet sales, for example.
Mm-hmm. So to explain that, it's the Wayfair decision, and basically what the Supreme Court has said is that a state can collect sales tax on internet sales from other localities. So, for example, you're using Amazon, and you purchase from one of their providers. You buy a chair from Amazon in Chicago. Well, right now you're not paying Virginia sales tax on that chair. And for a long time, there was some legislation that prevented people from paying sales tax online. The Supreme Court decision said no, that's interstate commerce, and therefore states can in fact collect sales tax. So and it'll be up to the provider who's shipping the material to be able to collect that and make sure that they identify that. I have not seen the exact numbers yet of what that may be, nor have I seen the exact legislation yet. But that's certainly something that's working its way through both the House and the Senate in an effort to see if that's something that we want to do, is starting collecting sales tax. It also is a fairness issue. If you're going to mom and pop shop to go buy a chair and you have to pay Virginia sales tax there, but you can buy the same chair online from someplace else and you're going to buy it from them without paying sales tax, why are we penalizing the small business owner who can't compete online because they have to sell their products with a sales tax? So there's a fairness argument here, but as anything, when you add the word tax to any bill, it grows its own, it has its own tentacles that we have to deal with.
And Delegate Gooditis, you've been active in the renewable energy debate. I think you have some legislation regarding that as well.
I do. There are a couple of things. Last year we passed an act that would require Dominion Energy, that said that renewable energy is in the public interest. So I knew that when I was 7 years old, 1967. So now I have some legislation that would say we put it in the act. Now go ahead, Dominion Power, go ahead and start stepping up the creation of renewable energy, solar and wind powers. And then there's another bill, power, that is about PPAs, power purchase agreements, that would allow businesses, solar installation businesses, for example, to install solar panels on Delegate Collins' roof as an individual homeowner. that right now it would allow for that business to get funding to do that in a way that at the moment it's very difficult to get any sort of funding to install on individual homes.
And Doug, LaRock, you also have some legislation dealing with utilities, easements and pole attachments.
Yeah, I don't think there's a hotter topic when I talk to schools, municipal governments, when I go to a rural caucus, when we go to a Farm Bureau meeting. I was amazed that the last one I went to was probably about a third of the meeting was farmers saying we need better access to the internet. It affects the economy, education, delivery of a range of services, entertainment, and so on. I'm not a fan of the government trying to buy our way out of that. We have a bill that is actually bouncing between the private telecommunications people and the rural co-ops. And I thought when you came up with a decent idea that was a win-win-win, it would be smooth sailing. But when you're in their turf, it isn't as easy as you might think. But I'm optimistic, and if we can get the wrinkles out of that, we will have provided a motivation for the co-ops, rural co-ops that bring electricity to our homes, to have a strategic role in bringing the fiber to control devices that they want to control in the home if people choose to let them, but also bringing through excess capacity in fiber cables the ability to have high-speed internet at an affordable rate. So I'll give you more on that next time we speak, Woody.
Thank you. And Delegate Collins, in your attempt to protect young children, you have some legislation that would allow children, I believe, 14 years of age and younger, to testify by way of closed-circuit TV, especially in cases of abuse.
Right. So one of the things that we're focusing on this year is human trafficking. There's some statistics that I think are disturbing that the press is not talking about. When they talk about the 12,000 children that are being stopped at the border and removed from their parents, when you look at the statistics, only 2,000 of them actually have been removed from their parents. The other 10,000 were removed from somebody who was a non-parent. All of those children will be brought up here for the human sex trafficking trade or drug trafficking trade. And so we only caught 10,000. So one of the things we have found is that, of course, these children are scared and intimidated by their abusers or by their handlers. So we are cleaned up the code for both civil and criminal. If you are a juvenile under the age of 14 or younger, and you are a victim of sexual abuse or physical abuse, you can testify in camera in both civil and criminal hearings.
And this camera means in secret.
In secret, right. So you'll be sitting in it, so the victim would be in a judge's chambers. Usually it happens in a judge's chambers. It's a much more informal setting. The defense attorney, the prosecutor will be in the room to be able to question them, but it's being streamed or being recorded and sent into the courtroom so everyone can see it. And the reason we do civil is because we have what's called protective orders. And so the court needs to hear testimony as to the abuse and neglect and the assaults that may have taken place on the juvenile. So we want to make sure they don't have to face they don't have to face the abuser when they're in court, and then hopefully we can get more convictions.
Hey, thank you all for being here. Dave LaRock, Wendy Gooditis, and Chris Collins. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.